Hello everyone, and welcome to Executive Scrutiny meeting on the 9th of the 6th, 2020. Hello to all members and officers present, and the thousands of members of the public out there who I'm sure are riveted by our undertakings this evening. I hope everyone is well, and I hope all your families are too. I'm going to start off just by going through the agenda. So agenda item 1, are there any apologies?
Chair, I have apologies from Councillor Eldred.
Thank you. Are there any more? No. Okay. Late items to be introduced by the chair. So you've had an email circulated. There was a late item. I'm just going to check whether we will take that now. Bear with me, Stephen. Are we going to hear that now, or is it going to be?
Chair, is probably best if we move through our agenda, and then when we get to the cabinet agenda, we can take that under late items for the cabinet agenda.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Okay. And the minutes held on the meetings of the 10th of March and for what it's worth, the 12th of May. We managed a bit of a meeting, didn't we, I guess? So is everyone happy to move those minutes? Oh, there's a question from Councillor Kerr. Do you want to ask the question, Councillor Kerr?
Just to ask when the late item was circulated so that I might be able to track it down, because I don't remember seeing it.
Chair, I think my colleague Karen Squires is on the call, and she circulated this afternoon, so she might be able to give a time when that went out.
It was approximately 2:30 this afternoon.
Thanks, Karen.
Sorry I'm late, Chair.
Councillors, I think we have temporarily lost the chair. I'm not quite sure what's happened there. He's dropped out of the call. Would one of the vice chairs mind temporarily taking over whilst we try and get Councillor Anderson back on the call, please?
Councillor Evans, I think that would be, I think you're the only vice chair in at the moment, aren't you?
I think Rob Cooper's here. If you want to ask him first, I don't mind.
Councillor Cooper, yes, of course.
John, are you in the council house or something?
I'm in the chamber.
Yeah, you can rule then. You've got the location set. I think you look very smart, and you crack on, mate.
Right, let's get to the items of the agenda. I just need to get it back up on my computer.
Right, well, that was annoying. So apologies for that. My laptop decided that it needed to restart at that very moment. So I do apologise for that. Hopefully that is the last of our technical difficulties. I've also put another 50p in the meter just in case. So, Councillor Kerr, I left as you were asking a question.
It was about when the late item was circulated, and it came through this afternoon from Karen Squires, so I've now been able to access it, and thanks for giving me a little bit of time to glance at it.
No problem. Okay, thank you. So let me just get back up there. Nothing like technical difficulties to throw you off. Okay, forward plan now. Is there anything that we need to cover on that? We have the attachment here. Let's published on the 12th of May. Are there any questions on that? Okay, I'll take that as a no. We move on to the next agenda item, which is the Council Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations. They are attached. Are there any questions or comments on that as well? No. Okay, so we move on to item 7, which is the Council Cabinet agenda. There we go. Sorry, please bear with me. I'm using two laptops at the same time. Okay, we start with item 8 on there, which is the housing. Am I on the right page?
So, Chair, if I may we just have the late item. We just need to acknowledge.
Oh, yes, apologies, sorry.
Item 2 of the Cabinet agenda.
Yeah, sorry. So item 2, late item. So you will have heard that there is a late item. Stephen, will we be taking that item now?
You can do. You can do. You can put the item wherever you want. But if you want to take it now, then that's fine.
Let's take it now. So that is property of Suan Lim. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for accepting this late item. The report in front of you outlines the temporary flexibilities to children's services legislation that local authorities can make use of if required as from the 24th of April 2020. And the primary reason it is late, and apologies to Executive Scrutiny, is that the original guidance indicated that approval would be at Chief Officer level if the need arose to exercise any flexibilities. However, given that the Adult Services Care Act easements came through Cabinet and for reasons of consistency, it's been advised that the children's element also is considered and approved through this process. So the report outlines a summary of the 10 care regulation amendments now in the Adoption and Children Coronavirus Amendment Regulations 2020. And the 10 flexibilities are specified and set out in Appendix 1 at the end of the report, along with which ones Derby City intend to apply. So the amendments have been established to assist children's social care sector respond to needs during the coronavirus pandemic, and these are temporary flexibilities up until the 25th of September, when this legislation will be reviewed by the Secretary of State, and this is outlined in section 4.1. All the other legislation pertaining to the statutory duties of children's services remains throughout the pandemic. Sections 4.2 to 4.6 outlines the required criteria, assessment process and decision making to be followed before implementing any of the flexibilities. And the appendix at the end provides a clear indication regarding the exercise of 2 of the 10 flexibilities, those being use of virtual fostering panels and the acceptance of self-declared health assessments for proposed foster carers. And the basis of exercising flexibility in these 2 specific areas is firstly to ensure we have no delays in progressing the recruitment and approval of Derby City Council foster carers during this period, given that fostering and recruitment of carers is both a corporate priority and linked to the Council's MTFP. And secondly, that sufficiency of suitable and safe appropriate placements has never been so great for vulnerable children and young people. So the recommendations in the report are to agree to implement the flexibilities as set out in the report and specifically at Appendix 1, noting that all the flexibilities will be kept under review until the 25th of September if such need arises, and to delegate the authority for that decision making in future to the Strategic Director of People. Thank you, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Suan. I'm going to just go through the list now. It's alphabetical on first name, so I'll start with Councillor Shankar. Is there any question from you?
No, Chair.
Councillor Ashburner. We'll come back to Councillor Ashburner. Councillor Testro.
No questions from me.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do have one clarification, really. Under the Appendix 1, changes to Fostering Services England regulations, could Sue explain, is the DCC are going to have introduced the Coram BAIF health self-declaration form? I don't understand what that is. If I could have some understanding of what that Coram BAIF health self-declaration form is. Thank you.
Certainly, Councillor. It's Coram Bath, and it's the accepted template that we use within our fostering assessment processes. It's just the name of the template and the assessment, and we've adapted it.
Would it be possible to receive a copy of that sometime?
Of course, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Can I just, before I just carry on and ask Councillor Kerr, can I ask that all councillors have their videos on at all times during these meetings? It's part of the rules, so let's make sure that we adhere to them, please. Councillor Kerr, any questions from you?
Yeah, thank you, sir, and for the introduction. That's really helpful, particularly as we haven't had long to read it. Is there a process by which any other flexibilities, if any other flexibilities are introduced, they will be reported back to somebody, or if there's a mechanism for review and feedback to the government at the end of this period when they're reviewing it in September, is there a mechanism by which we could be gathering comments that we might want to feed back to them?
Councillor Kerr, the DFE are regularly asking us regarding any application of the flexibilities. So we are recording that on both a regional basis. The regional directors of children's services are gathering that locally. And in terms of then the collective narrative, are you sorry, can I just clarify, are you wanting that which way are you wanting that, coming back to cabinet here, or going through to central government? Because I think that pathway is already there.
I was thinking it might be important to us. You've reported to cabinet, you will be reporting to cabinet, the flexibilities exist, and there seems to need to be a bit of a closing that loop to say when those have been used. So I was wondering if a process was already in mind, or whether it was going to be set up, or whether we should suggest to cabinet that it should be set up.
In the basis of the report, I've outlined between 4.2 and 4.6 the process and the decision making. So based on criteria, based on need, there will be a discussion between myself, my senior leadership team, the strategic director of people, and the portfolio holder regarding any further requirement and exercise of any further flexibilities, and the decision will be recorded and made at that point.
But through you, Chair, that recording process isn't actually in the public domain. So for people who, and I'd hope loads of people in our city are concerned about child welfare, there won't be a mechanism by which they would know what regulations are moving into a special route. I'm just thinking there ought to be a mechanism for that to get into the public domain.
Yeah. At this present moment in time, I appreciate that. At the present moment in time, we are not envisaging that we will be requiring any more use of the flexibilities. But I'm happy to be guided in terms of publishing or communicating any further decisions that we decide to make.
Councillor Kerr, are you happy with, is there anything else you'd like to say or ask?
I shall type something into and suggest as an amendment that we put to cabinet to ensure that we close the loop on that, Chair.
Okay, no problem. Then Stephen will come back round at the end of the discussion for you to be able to do that. Can I just apologise for the sound of the vacuum cleaner in the background? For some reason it needs doing now. Councillor Peatfield, any questions from you?
No questions, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Heselgrave, any questions from you?
Yes, Chair. On page 2, last bullet point, it says the regulations also include a number of savings provisions. Is this monetary savings or some legal term? What's the meaning of that paragraph, actually?
And back over, Swan.
They're not in relation to financial savings. They're I suppose in terms of
must be a legal term or something.
But I do know that in terms of one of the reasons why we're exercising the foster care elements are because we have that as a corporate priority in terms of, and it is linked to our financial MTFP. So in order not to progress with the recruitment of foster carers would be detrimental to our current position.
Thank you.
Emily has a response for that, Councillor Hazelgrave, so I'm just going to hand over to Emily.
Hi, yes, sorry. Good evening, committee. It's a savings provision basically helps. It's a very technical legal provision which essentially prevents the remainder of a piece of legislation becoming invalidated if at a future point an item of legislation is deemed invalid, if you see what I mean. So it essentially says you can take that provision out of the legislation and the rest of the legislation will stand.
Thank you, Emily. Councillor Hazelgrave, is that a good enough explanation for you?
No, thank you for that explanation. I'm really sorry I'm the only one around the table who didn't know what it meant, apart from Emily.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else to follow up on, Councillor Hazelgrave? Or is that?
Sorry, I keep muting.
That's fine.
No, nothing.
No problem. Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
I'm absolutely fine, thank you, Chair.
Lovely to hear it, Councillor Hudson. Councillor Cooper.
Nothing at the minute, thank you, Chair.
No worries at all. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Stephen now. Obviously, there is already a recommendation that is in the chat box, but that obviously needs reading out for the public record as well. Stephen, I'm happy to do that, but if you want to see if anyone else has any recommendations, then please feel free to do so.
We will deal with this one, Chair, I think.
Okay, yep, the suggested recommendation from Councillor Kerr. Councillor Kerr, would you like to read it?
I can read it. What I've suggested is that we should ask Cabinet to agree a mechanism to ensure that if any flexibilities are introduced, that this is reported to Cabinet or another public council meeting in a timely manner.
Okay, are we happy to move to the vote on that one?
Yes.
Sorry, apologies. Emily would like to comment.
I'm sorry. I don't know. I was a little late in there, but I was just checking something, and I wouldn't normally comment on things like this in exec scrutiny. But I am aware that a decision-making record log and a decision-making flowchart has been produced by my adult social care lawyer colleague Alison Bush in relation to the Care Act easements, and I would therefore suggest that exactly the same flowchart and mechanism could also be used for recording any decision to exercise these flexibilities, and that could be easily adopted. I've just sent that through to Sue-Ann so that she's aware of that.
May I?
Absolutely, Councillor Kerr, yeah.
I don't know whether that flowchart, which I haven't seen, actually includes a mechanism by which the public are aware of what is happening. And if it doesn't include a mechanism by which the public have access to, then maybe it should. So if it can be amended, if it doesn't already include such a mechanism, it can be amended to do so, then this could equally well follow it. And I tried to phrase it in my recommendation in a way that would enable cabinets to be flexible in what they're doing. But do you know whether the adults process includes access by the public to that information?
Councillor Kerr, there's no requirement under the Care Act easements to publish, but the view is that they will be carefully recorded and therefore be made available on request to the public and would of course be FOIable. But the idea is that they wouldn't be routinely published, for example, on the council website, but would be available on request.
Councillor Kerr?
Thanks, Chair. I feel that not to know whether there's something to ask for is an unsatisfactory way of dealing with information. I think that if it's no good, you could ask every day, has anything happened? And that's a big waste of both officer time and individual time.
Councillor Kerr, could I make a suggestion that there's no, I don't think, any intention of it being anything other than transparent here, and it is a key point that has been already considered in relation to the Care Act easements, and therefore probably the easiest thing to do is for officers for Sue-Ann to speak with relevant officers in the legal team so that they can explain to you exactly how that decision-making process is going to be recorded, because there is a detailed structure for it, which I'm not close to, but has already been carefully looked at.
Chair, my final point that this is a recommendation to Cabinet. Between now and Cabinet meeting tomorrow afternoon, there can be further work done in the background as to how our concern, if other people support it, can be met in the government process, and whether it's appropriate or not is in the hands of Cabinet to consider. This is only a recommendation. We're not making a final decision.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Yeah, that's correct. And so I'm going to move to a vote now if everyone else is happy to do so. So I didn't remind you how I'll be doing votes. So I'm going to, as I just did with the questions, go through every councillor, and you'll have to indicate with a for, against, or I believe abstention. Is that right, Stephen?
Yep, that's fine, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to check that we did have abstentions in committee. Okay, so Councillor Shankar.
Sorry, I'm on now. Abstain.
Abstain. Okay. Councillor Ashburner.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Testro.
For.
Councillor Evans.
For.
Councillor Kerr.
Sorry, for.
For the public record, thank you. Councillor Peatfield.
Abstain.
Councillor Heselgrave.
Abstain.
Councillor Hudson.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
And Councillor Anderson for. Okay, so that recommendation goes forward to the Cabinet tomorrow. Thank you for that, Councillor Kerr, and thank you, Emily, as well, for the explanation on that. I'm sure some resolution will be found. Are there any further recommendations that anyone would like to make? No? Okay, well, if that's the case, I'd like to say thank you to Sue-Ann. Am I saying your name correctly? Because I'm dreadful at names. So
yes, that's correct. Yes, okay. Correct, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Apologies for if I have butchered it in the past, but thank you for the report and for obviously presenting it to us. You know, even if it was at late notice, we do appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bear with me. I'm just going to move on to the next. Okay, we're going to move on to item 8 now, which is the Housing Strategy 2020 to 2029, and that is the property of Rachel North. Is that correct? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, committee. Just to introduce this, an overarching sense, and there are officers on the call to answer any detailed questions about this. The housing strategy is an important component to the Council's overall policy framework about the really critical things that play a part in the health and well-being of our city and the regeneration of our city. So the housing market, this is a strategy about the whole housing market, owner-occupied sector, private rented housing, the social sector. It's about all the housing that underpin, if you like, the experience of our citizens across the city. In terms of this strategy, it has been developed very much in partnership with a range of our stakeholders across the city. As you can imagine, the breadth of that reach incorporates a whole range of people and partners that need to have a say in it, and it is sort of a 10-year overarching sort of framework, if you like, for the priorities City Council working with partners will deliver. We needed to make an assessment, obviously, of the impact of COVID-19 on this strategy, so it has come slightly later than we originally planned to Exec Scrutiny and obviously to Cabinet. There was a need to understand what the impact of COVID-19 may be on our housing market, and that isn't absolutely clear at this stage. As we can imagine, the degree of change is quite considerable, but we have tried to make sure we're mindful of potential impacts that may affect the priorities around how we intervene and support the housing market. Just for clarity, the strategy is a requirement of the Council to have a strategic approach to how we support dealing with housing issues for our citizens. So it has got a statutory function in our policy framework. And also, I think worth reflecting, it also recognises a change in focus and attention at a national government level about the really important role that housing plays as that foundation stone, if you like, of people's lives, their ability to be, resilient, to have families, to support their future, their health and their well-being, and also the economic growth of a city. So really has been a recognition of some big challenges around our housing market at a national level, and the need to have a sense of how we approach that and respond to it. It also includes an analysis of the pressures and the data, if you like, around our particular market in the Derby context. So the strategy itself is quite an overarching document. It looks at 4 big strategic priorities, sort of themes, if you like, that set the overarching context of our priorities. And they are focusing on making the best use of our existing stock. So how can we recognise the need across all those 10 years, really use those properties most effectively? They're particularly around empty properties being used to meet some of our housing need, and really looking at how we can use all of the houses and the homes in SSE to meet some of those needs for our whole community. Second priority is around housing quality and standards. A real sense, particular focus in the private rented sector. Is the quality of housing being offered appropriate? Are we enforcing some of the regulatory rights we have around some of that area? And also trying to impose, to make sure we are supporting green initiatives in how those housing quality is delivered for those particular sectors. The third priority, almost like a given really, but how do we make sure that the right housing for our most vulnerable groups is available? And that obviously includes our rough sleepers and our homeless priorities, but also about those communities that need particularly bespoke types of housing, whether that's care leavers or with learning disabilities or other supported needs. How do we make sure that the housing stock that meets their needs is available and appropriate? And then fourthly, in terms of priorities, how do we make sure that housing development supports that regeneration agenda, economic growth, transformation of the city, using housing as a mechanism in the right places? So overarching, the strategy is an overarching framework. There are a number of sub-strategies that have come to Cabinet and will continue to come to Cabinet: allocations policy, empty properties, homelessness, etc., housing renewal, and they have detailed action plans within them that are part of this overall suite, if you like, of our approach to our housing responsibilities. So that is setting out that overarching strategy. There are detailed plans in the other plans, and any questions anyone wanted to ask, we have officers here on the call, both Ian Fulliger, the head of service for this area, and Jeremy Mason, principal housing officer, are both on the call to take any more questions on the detail. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to open up to questions now. Councillor Shankar, do you have one or 3?
Not at this stage, yeah.
All right, no worries. I just want to comment, having read this. I think there's some interesting stuff in there about tenants and obviously some of the protections that need to happen, and working with both tenants and landlords. What I want to ask is that how are we going to make sure, in light of some of the fantastic landlords that are out there, that they get some of the credit they deserve whilst also making sure that we are being very, very strict on some of the absolutely appalling ones?
Yeah, I'd like Ian to answer that question. We have a really high-performing function inside the council that works with landlords and tenants. I'm sure Ian can explain some of that in more detail. Ian?
Yes, good evening, everybody. Yes, so very much working with landlords is very much a carrot and stick approach. We have services in the council. We've got the council's own decent and safe homes service, and that actually works across the East Midlands region with a large number of other authorities. And the focus of that service is all about incentivising landlords, trying to get them engaged with us to make sure that they manage and maintain their properties in the manner that they should do. And as part of that, we do very much recognise good performance, and we have a system whereby they can form an alliance with the council and be registered by us, and that is therefore an acknowledgement for them that their stock is in good condition and meets the standards that we're looking for. In terms of the carrot, if you like, the stick, I'm sorry. In terms of the stick, we have an enforcement team that's managed by Mike Kay. Many of you will know him. And of course, their focus is all around housing standards, absolutely ensuring that the health and safety risks in the very worst properties in the city are addressed, and if necessary, firm action is taken with landlords. And members will be aware that in the last year or so, there's been 2 or 3 really quite high-profile cases where bad landlords have been prosecuted in Derby, and the fines have been significant, and that's received quite a lot of publicity. And of course, sending out a powerful message that if you're a bad landlord, we just don't want you in Derby.
Thank you, Ian. I appreciate the your answer on that one. I'm going to move on to Councillor Ashburner now.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ashburner. Councillor Testro, any question from you?
No, I'm fine. Thank you very much, Chair.
Councillor Evans. I'll come back to Councillor Evans. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I've got several comments, and I'd like to know more about several areas. So if I start with what I think the 2 things that I particularly appreciate here are the mention of looking at whole communities and not just housing in isolation. And I think this works well, hopefully, alongside the planning and the Part 2 planning work that's going on at the moment. And I'm very mindful that communities need more than just shops. They need jobs as well. And if we can include the job opportunities within housing areas, as we are trying to do in Infinity Park, I think that's really important. And secondly, the willingness for the council to take on housing sites and to enable that development to start where it's maybe a bit sluggish. I think that sounds more positive here than we have been in the past, and I think that can be very valuable. I've also heard rumour that this might be something that the government will be looking at potentially as a result of trying to restart the economy post-COVID. So it might be something that we need to particularly be thinking about at this stage. I've also got some bits that I feel may be an opportunity to explore further, and one of the points was on the housing standards team and whether we work also with letting agencies as well as with the actual owners of properties as an intermediary.
Yeah, shall I answer that, Ian? We do absolutely work with letting agents and landlord organisations as well as individual landlords, yes.
Good. There was quite a good paragraph or 2 on the challenge of getting people to move out of council or probably also housing association properties. when they or move downsize when families have left, and the challenge that we have of that. And I wondered whether there was an opportunity to explore that further, because I think that in terms of getting a better utilisation of our housing stock, that is a key theme. And it's something that I think could be picked up in the allocations policy and in tenancy strategy. And those two pieces of work seem to be going to be happening this year, assuming everything goes to plan. And I wondered whether they were already being considered. And the sort of points that I would look into that are whether there's a way in which we can share spare bedrooms rather than everybody needing to have their own spare bedroom. That if you live in a extra care complex, for example, there may well be a bedroom that you can book when you want family or friends to come and stay. Is there a mechanism by which we could do something like that in a wider environment? Whether our rules on subletting are correct, or whether there's an opportunity to actually deal with some of the people who are on our waiting lists by enabling them to sublet in council property and enabling that to happen. And it might also cover some of the sort of more supportive type housing. So, for example, a care leaver might be able to go and be living with somebody in a council house and be getting a bit of support from that individual as well. And again, obviously fostering is an angle there that have we suggested to people who are under-occupying whether fostering might be something they'd like to do. So, and I'm sure there are many other ideas that we could be exploring in the allocations and tenancy policy areas when we look at those in more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I guess Ian, sharing spare rooms and other things.
Yes, okay. So absolutely agree with you about the importance of enabling people to downsize, whether that's council and housing association tenants, and ensuring that we've got really good policies and incentives to help those tenants to downsize. But as Rachel was saying at the introduction, it's very much about the wider housing market and how moving forward as a council we want to interact much more with players in the wider housing market. So it's working with developers and other third parties. So part of the offer is about getting developers to build the types of accommodation, smaller accommodation, that people might typically want. So in other words, as members will well know, we aren't particularly well served in the city with bungalows, and particularly attractive bungalows, attractive sheltered and extra care accommodation. So it's encouraging developers where we can to build that type of accommodation so that those couples and single people who are living in 4 and 5 bed properties have got an attractive offer for them to voluntarily move down to a house that is right sized. You mentioned fostering there, Councillor Kerr, and absolutely we have put the process in place whereby if a foster family want to, or a potential foster family would like to either foster for the first time or foster more children, that we have said that we will look to make available council accommodation, a larger council house, specifically to enable that fostering to go ahead, because of the outcomes for those children are so much more improved if we can get them into a foster care family. And of course there's financial benefits to the council as well that far outweigh the cost of us providing a larger property to a family. Subletting is something that we're certainly going to be looking into. It obviously brings risks with it in terms of if the council are nominating people or encouraging people to sublet, but certainly in terms of extra care accommodation, that's very much good practice for those providers to have guest rooms on tap, so that, as you say, family can move in when they need to for a night or two to see their loved ones. And I suspect as we move out of COVID, a number of those issues around supporting people, greater flexibility in the housing market to enable people to be supported in their own homes are all something that we're going to be looking at as we go forward.
Okay.
Anything else to add, Councillor Kerr, before I move on?
I think I'm really encouraged by those sorts of issues being taken on board, and I hope that as we've got the empty home strategy and the allocations policy both being looked at this year and still on track for that, those sorts of points will be picked up in there. But I think we need to look at, I think it's important to remember that people don't just live in a house, but they are part of a community. And enabling people to remain in their community rather than move to the house that's the right size in a new build is often not the attractive thing, and particularly if people are getting older, they want to be able to be in their community. So I think we need to look at to be particularly mindful of enabling people to stay where they are, but making better use of the building stock that we have and look at other mechanisms by how we can do that. And I hope that will be able to come up in those periods. Just thinking about the COVID and what we're learning from here, there isn't really a comment within this, which might be an oversight, in that I know that a lot of people have, in the days before lockdown, they made quick decisions to say they were going to move in with a partner just to be not on their own. And I don't know whether that is going to be part of a learning curve, and whether people as a result of that are going to be more mindful of the importance of community and not being alone, and whether that's something that may make a difference to housing demand in future. It may not be something we can answer, but it might be something that would be worth putting an extra line in somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. And Rachel, I imagine you noted, and Ian, I imagine you noted Councillor Kerr's previous point. Final
Absolutely.
Point.
I think I would say that the COVID emergency may change behaviour in a whole range of ways we can't possibly predict, but absolutely being flexible and adaptable to be able to meet that is part of the strategy's concepts.
Thank you. So I'm just going to drop back one. Councillor Evans, do you have a question?
Yes, Chair, I think it's working now. Thank you. It's only a small point, really. On the priorities in more detail, 4.9 priority 1, it's continuing on from where Lucy spoke, really. It mentions about making the best use of the homes we already have. And in particular, I'm interested in the under occupation item. And really, if that could be expanded on, because it is multifaceted, really. It's got to protect existing tenants and who occupy, and going forward, it might be that tenancy agreements have got some requirements in that if there is under occupancy, the property can be taken back. But we need to be protecting the existing ones, really, and I wanted to get some reassurance off Rachel and the team. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
thank you, Councillor Evans.
Sorry, Chairman. There's a couple of things with that question, and recognising all tenures. Our ability to influence change is different in different tenures. Now, clearly, in the social housing stock, in the degree of the tenancy agreement, there are some securities around that which don't allow, that to be done other than by agreement. But clearly, there are some tenancies that allow us to be more directive, if you like, about not allowing people to stay in properties that have got too many two bedrooms in them. But often in the sector, it's the owner-occupied sector which has the highest proportion of properties that are underused, and often, for very good reasons, families grow up and they leave and then the bedrooms are still there, and that's very difficult for us to influence directly because clearly that's a private market. But we can do things that can incentivise people to make it easier. Often some of the barriers to downsizing is the sheer concern, anxiety about moving out of a property and getting all the removals done and packing everything up. And we can look at mechanisms that can incentivise that, making that easier for people to try and make it easier. There's a range of different methodologies to particular circumstances, really. But do you want to add anything to that, Ian? Have I missed anything?
Jeremy, do you want to comment? I know you've looked in the past at the tenancy strategy and our ability to or not to introduce fixed tenancies and that sort of thing.
Yes, a brief comment on that. If I can just check that I can be heard properly. I have had some reception problems.
You can.
Am I coming through?
Yep.
You're coming through, Jeremy.
Great, so thank you. So the Localism Act in 2011-12 gave local authorities the legal right to start introducing fixed term tenancies, limited tenancies on their general needs housing stock. And this is something that we considered in Darby at the time. The view at the time was that no, we didn't want to introduce limited tenancies because we were concerned that it might cause instability in communities, that people, if they received a council home and knew that it might be taken away in a number of years, 5 years, 2 years, whatever it would be, would not invest in the home and their community in the same way that they do when they have a home for life. However, because of the shortage we have of large properties, 4 bedrooms or more typically, this is something that we can review if we decide it's a sensible thing to do. The Localism Act gives us the legal basis for doing that, and the Tenancy Strategy, which Councillor Kerr has referred to a couple of times, is our policy statement on that. That policy is due for review this year, so that is the forum in which this question could be considered if we want to do it again.
Thank you, Jeremy. Does that answer your question, Councillor Evans? Are you happy with the response there?
I'm happy with the response. Thank you, Chair.
No problem, Councillor Evans. Councillor Peatfield, anything you'd like to add or ask?
Yes, please, Chair. I'm really dismayed, really, to not see a chapter in this housing strategy on climate change. The only reference that I can find is in the action plan on page 44, which says that there's been a severe delay of the climate change steering group, a delay of 6 months. But there's no action coming out of that. There's been no urgency to call another meeting. The first meeting was before lockdown. We've been locked down for 3 months now. We've had absolutely no movement on that climate change meeting at all. There's no movement towards any of the subgroups which would be formed, and I can see it taking another 6 months. This is just dragging on way too long, and I don't see how we can publish a housing strategy plan for the next 10 years that does not include climate change, carbon reduction in our housing policy.
Open that up for response.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's necessarily a question about the strategy in detail, but I would say the question about the working group, and we'll come on to the recovery report in a minute in terms of the council's resources and what's been done to try and deal with the emergency reaction to the pandemic, has meant some things have had to, be paused for a period of time in terms of the working around things. So I'm not suggesting the officer involved has been pausing anything. There has been a lot of work going on with the officer to get some of those things set up, but the calling of a steering group and those things have perhaps been left while other things have been more important in the short-term response to the pandemic. In terms of climate change as part of the housing strategy, I think it is written within the strategy in a number of different places about the importance of reflecting the green agenda, how we can do our best with redevelopment to make sure we're using green technology in new housing stock, development issues, and understanding that, but also particularly around our private sector condition and quality work. How do we make sure we are using methodologies that achieve better climate change impacts in those areas? So there is, I think, throughout the strategy, there are references made to the need to reflect climate change and the impact of being greener in some of the housing decisions. But there isn't a specific chapter on it, and that's a decision about how we perhaps framed strategy itself.
Councillor Peatfield, is there anything to...
I understand, thank you, Chair. I understand that obviously COVID is an emergency, but then so is climate change. So, I don't accept that 3 months is a reasonable delay on forming these groups, these subgroups, and getting moving. I question really whether we have the time now to listen to these subgroups, because it just takes so long for anything to happen, and we've just lost 3 months of it. The fact that there's just no chapter on it at all, nothing solid, references to green here and green there is all very nice, but it's not a commitment to anything at all, and we need commitment. Can this housing strategy plan, can it be amended as it goes along?
I mean, absolutely, as a strategy, it sets an overarching framework for what's important to us in our city and the housing market as a whole, and we want to put our focus. As in the report, it's quite clear there are a number of sub-strategies that have the detail in them, and some of those are coming back to the Cabinet during this year for review. So there are opportunities and all those opportunities to make sure that agenda is more prominent or in the detail about how we're going to take action and intervene in certain parts of those aspects, so that can be done. I think it sets a framework. I mean, clearly at the beginning I made the point that the COVID-19 pandemic has changed some of the behaviours and the housing market, the way it operates, because in really significant terms we don't understand yet. So clearly any strategy we set as a council needs to be adaptive and flexible to be able to morph if it needs to reflect the reality of what's happening on the ground.
Thank you, Rachel. Nadine, I've just had an indication from Councillor Kerr in the conversation box, so I'm just going to invite Councillor Kerr to come in, then I'll come back if you have any follow-up, if that's okay. Councillor Kerr?
Thank you. There's a section on page 27 of the strategy on climate change, which I thought did sound a bit as if it was a slight afterthought, but it contains, I think, some positive bits there. I don't know whether, Councillor Peatfield, you had spotted it. Headed climate change, and it doesn't say everything it needs to say, but it does open the opportunity for more, as Rachel was saying. There's going to be more meat added to that once we do get our meetings happening again. And I'm absolutely with you that we need to have those meetings going forward, and I was disappointed that it was that the climate change strategy was in red at the end, because it's not quite got itself moving. But I think for me, the basis of what we need to build on is here in the strategy, and it's up to us as councillors to emphasise that and to push officers to take things forward further, especially within the private sector. I think the private sector is where it's probably a bit weak, but we need to do that taking the people of Derby with us.
If I could jump in there, Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Rachel's exactly right. This is obviously the overarching strategy. There are two more plans and strategies that I would just mention. The first is the housing renewal policy, and again we will be consulting them, publishing that within the next 9 months or so, and that is very much looking at how we interact with the private sector, looking at private sector rented properties in particular, and what the council can do to try and improve a range of issues in relation to those properties, and climate change and energy use is very much part of that. And then the members will be familiar with the Housing Revenue Account business plan that is renewed every year. And again, that will be reviewed around Christmas this year. And I know that certainly colleagues in Derby Homes are working very hard at the moment to look at how we can increase the pace of our energy measures, particularly looking at things like air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps and how they can be brought into our estate. So that sort of more detailed thinking will come forward in a couple of other plans within the next 8-10 months, that sort of timescale.
Okay, Councillor Peatfield, I've had Jeremy indicate that he has a response for you too. Are you happy for me to take that, or do you have a follow-up?
Yes, that's fine. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Jeremy, did you have something to mention?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I agree entirely with Councillor Peatfield on the importance of climate change. But the way I would look at it is climate change is so important that to give it its own chapter doesn't give it due importance. The same as homelessness prevention and a number of other issues. That is why, and we have this in the action plan, there is an action to produce a standalone climate change strategy, not, if you like, relegate it to a subsection of the housing strategy. I think that's the best way to make sure we give this crucial issue prominence. And I would suggest that what we need to do is make sure that that is delivered corporately rather than the emphasis of where it sits within the housing strategy, because it cuts across, as we all know, areas across not just housing, but industry, transport, etc., etc. So the priority, I would suggest, is get our climate change strategy up and running. That's the priority.
Thank you. Councillor Peatfield, do you want to come back?
Thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate that.
Councillor Peatfield, you've muted yourself, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Jeremy. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. But it doesn't say so in this housing strategy. It doesn't refer to the bigger picture there. So I think that when this strategy, if it's approved tomorrow at Cabinet, it will be severely disappointing to a lot of people across Derby, and we will, as a council, will come under criticism for not featuring it more heavily in this report. So I do have a recommendation, both perhaps to flesh out a bit in the housing strategy document here, but also to get moving as quickly as possible as a matter of urgency with the subgroup, the housing subgroup in particular. After all, we are aware, hopefully most of us are aware, that residential carbon emissions are 28% of all of Derby's emissions. So that's the highest. It's higher than transport.
Okay, Councillor Peatfield, what I'll do then is we'll come back to you at the end as we go through and seek recommendations. Jeremy has indicated that he has a final comment / response, so I'll let him have that, and then we'll move on to the next councillor.
Thanks. Just to say, agree entirely. I mean, there is a categoric action in the action plan of the strategy to say we will produce a climate change action plan, but I totally take on board. Yeah, we can look at those issues. Thanks for raising them and highlighting them.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Councillor Kerr, you've indicated in the chat box that you just would like to quickly say something. Is that correct? I just want to remind councillors that obviously the chat box is an excellent tool to make me aware that you want to say something, but it's not the place to say things. This is a public meeting. So, Councillor Kerr.
This is really just the same point as Jeremy was making, emphasising the we will under the climate change, which in the layout of most of the areas that would be in a box. And I think this is why I thought that it was a sort of afterthought, because it's not being given that prominence by putting it into a coloured box. If it was in a coloured box, we'd all think more about it. So maybe that's just an editing change that can happen potentially even before tomorrow.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Councillor Hazelgrave now. Do you have any questions, Councillor Hazelgrave?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson, anything from you?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, anything from you?
I'd just like to make comment, please, Chair, that I'd like to thank the council officers for their contribution, particularly for the question from Councillor Peatfield. Having faux outrage about something when we are ultimately just recovering from, well, we're not even, we're in the stages of recovering from a COVID-19 pandemic. To say such things without due thought of what the situation is in the council, I think is very concerning.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Yeah, that's noted. And Councillor Peatfield,
sorry,
is that
Chair.
something you'd? Sorry.
I didn't quite understand that. Could we just ask Councillor Cooper to explain what he means by that?
Yeah, I'd like to invite Councillor Cooper. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, or is?
Yeah, we're on. We're having a Skype meeting as we speak now. We've been working really hard as an authority in our communities to make sure that people are looked out for during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then to listen to Councillor Peatfield with, in my view, faux outrage about something that's not been done that she feels is very important. I think it lessens this debate. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna. Councillor Peatfield, I'm going to give you, if you want to briefly have the right to respond, you may. If not, I'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. I believe this is an executive scrutiny meeting in which we are scrutinising what's going to Cabinet tomorrow. That's exactly what I'm doing, and I think, actually, Councillor Cooper, you are completely out of order.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to just put a tie a ribbon on that one now. So to the section where we're going to talk about recommendations. I actually do have a recommendation myself for the first time ever, drum roll, but I'm happy to take Councillor Peatfield. Well, let's go down the list actually, Stephen, just and take them all in their sort of entirety, anyone who may have one. So, Councillor Shanker, any recommendation?
No, Chair.
I'll come back to me after Councillor Peatfield. Councillor Ashburner, anything from you?
No, nothing specific, although I do support Councillor Peatfield's comments.
Okay. Councillor Testrow, anything from you?
Not at this time, Chair, thanks.
Councillor Evans, anything from you?
No recommendations, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr.
Just the highlighting which and reformatting which Jeremy has said that he will make sure it happens before this document's finally published.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Peatfield, I've seen you indicate. I'll come back to you at the end if that's okay. Councillor Hazelgrave.
No, nothing at all, thanks.
Councillor Hudson.
No, thank you, Chair.
And Councillor Cooper.
Say again, Chair. I'll just went to pick up my phone. What's up?
Oh, sorry. Is there any recommendations?
No, Chair.
No problem. Thank you. So we'll start with Councillor Peatfield. Would you like, so I can read this out? Read this out in its entirety. Okay, the recommendation. In fact, Councillor Peatfield, I'll let you read it out. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Chair. It may be a little long-winded and needs tidying up, Stephen. Apologies. So the recommendation is to include more detail in the housing strategy on climate change strategy and to convene a meeting of the climate change steering group at the soonest possible date, with a view to forming the subgroups in order to produce actions for this document. And yes, Lucy, if you want to split that into two, that's absolutely fine.
Or 5 or 6. Okay. So I'm gonna move it to the vote as long as from Stephen and Emily that is an okay recommendation, and I'm sure you'd have indicated by now if it wasn't. Let's take this recommendation to the vote if we're happy to do that.
Yep.
Okay.
Chair, could we take it as two things? One about the document and two about the steering group.
Stephen, would you like to just give them a moment to write down what that looks like? Would that be helpful? And then we can read the two out for the public record.
I think the members just need to decide whether they do want to split that up or we vote on it as one, or
okay.
It's for the members to make the recommendation to cabinet. So
okay, thank you, Stephen.
Split it all.
So I mean, we can. So that's the recommendation as given. So we can vote on the recommendation as given, and then depending on the outcome of that, perhaps then if anyone wants to put in a further recommendation, I will extend that opportunity. If that's okay with everyone.
Chair, I'm happy to split it into two. So the first recommendation would be to include more information in the document on climate change, and the second recommendation will be to hold the steering group meeting as soon as possible.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Peatfield. So the first recommendation is to include more detail in the housing strategy on climate change. So I will take that to the vote now. Let's, Councillor Shanker.
4.
Councillor Ashburner.
4.
Councillor Testrow.
4.
Councillor Evans.
Abstain.
Councillor Kerr.
4.
Councillor Peatfield.
4.
Councillor Hazelgrave.
4.
Councillor Hudson.
4.
Councillor Cooper.
Abstain.
And I am going to also abstain on that one. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next part of the recommendation, which, sorry, that passes. Apologies, I should have said that. The next part of the recommendation is to convene a meeting of the Climate Change Steering Group at the soonest possible date with a view to forming the subgroups in order to produce actions for this housing strategy document. That was a good mouthful for me. I'm going to, again, go down the list on that one. So Councillor Shanker.
For, Chair.
Councillor Ashburner.
For.
Councillor Testrow.
For.
Councillor Evans. Is your microphone not working? Can you do a thumbs up for for, a thumbs down for against? Yep, Caesar says against, thank you. Councillor Kerr.
For.
Councillor Peatfield.
For.
Councillor Heselgrave.
For.
Councillor Hudson.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Abstain.
And I'm going to vote against that. So that one passes too. So those two recommendations have now passed. I've not had time to write my recommendation, so could you just give me a moment just while I just jot it down here? Or if some... so my recommendation is around wanting to see encourage a comms strategy where we do some work in encouraging landlords to want to seek accreditation. I'm sure that to some extent that already happens, but certainly I didn't know about that, and I think that renters in the city would really benefit from having their landlords taking part in our accreditation, and it really being something that's seen as an absolute that landlords really want to aspire to. So I'm going to try and make that a recommendation somehow. Can you bear with me just a second? Feel free to talk amongst yourselves, or I'll just mute while I type. Sorry. Okay, right. So the recommendation I've written is as follows. It's for a comm strategy to be established to really broadcast the benefits of the accredited landlord scheme and to encourage tenants to seek it out. Is that worded okay, Stephen? I've never actually done a recommendation. I tend to just listen to them.
I'm just having a look now, Chair.
Yeah, apologies. I did it.
Okay.
It's almost on the back of a cigarette packet.
Yes, that's fine, Chair. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move that to the vote now. Councillor Shanker.
For.
Councillor Ashburner. Councillor Ashburner.
Chair, I think Councillor Ashburner was muted,
Okay.
but I've unmuted him, so if you'd like to try again, Councillor Ashburner, you should be okay.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Councillor Ashburner. Councillor Testrow.
For.
Councillor Evans.
For.
Councillor Kerr.
For. I think it reads very well.
Thank you. Councillor Peatfield.
For.
Councillor Heselgrave.
For.
Councillor Hudson.
For.
And Councillor Cooper.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Ashburner, over to you. For, and I'm also for. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any more recommendations on that item? Okay, no problem. I'm going to move on then. I just want to say thank you to Rachel, to Jeremy, and to, oh my gosh, what's the Anyone wants to help and remind me?
Ian.
Ian. Sorry, Ian. Oh, apologies. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you for the way you answered the questions. You know, I think you really went into some depth, and we do genuinely appreciate that. I'm going to move on to the next item. Sorry, bear with me. Council Cabinet. Yeah, next item, which is item number 9, and it is the sponsor of it is Paul Simpson, who I don't know whether he's in here, but it's the Darby recovery plan.
I'm going to take
you,
this,
Rachel?
Chair.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you. This report is really laying out a framework for how we approach the next phase, if you like, of what it has been and is still an unprecedented and extraordinary and a quite unique moment in all of our lifetimes, the impact of the COVID pandemic. I think we've all been using those words a lot over the last 3 months, but it doesn't make them any less true. And that is the context in which we're working. And just to understand from the Council's point of view, over the last 3 months, we have been totally focused on how do we respond to the immediate emergency in the city caused by the pandemic, and that has been quite an extreme level of energy gone into how we responded to that, and we have done some quite fundamental things to change the way the council operated, move staff from different services to different services, create completely new services in partnership with a variety of stakeholders, distributing lots and lots of funds to our local businesses, providing supports to care homes, doing lots and lots of different things that we wouldn't have necessarily had in our minds 3.5 months ago we were ever going to have to do. So it was being quite an incredible, fast-paced and reactive moment, if you like, in dealing with the pandemic. And at the same time as that, trying to reorganise the council to accommodate what COVID means for us and for our workforce. It is quite significant, and I'm sure many of you are aware of all of that and what it's meant for us about changing how we deliver our services. And I wanted to make the point that we are still in this emergency. It's not over. I mean, I know we feel that we're getting to a different phase now, and it's really hope, fingers crossed, we're in that space. But for the council, we've still got really important jobs to do to support the reaction to the pandemic. For example, the test, trace and isolate work that is coming down to the council. We have a major role in our public health capacity to support what may be local lockdowns in local communities. So there's a whole range of what does that mean for our staff, how do we get involved in this tracing. That's still emerging, but it's quite a large next component we need to be aware of and supporting. And of course things like opening up our city centre and district centres safely. So we're not out of the emergency yet. I want to make that point really. But alongside all that response stuff we're doing, the council has been working alongside our city, and I would say for me is personally throughout these last 3 months to have such a really powerful partnership with our partners across this city has been really a real strength for the place and for the council, and that underpins how we want to make sure that the framework of how we would support recovery is also maintained. That partnership is so important. And the word recovery is really a sense of recognising that the world is going to shift. It's shifted already and is shifting. And what do we do to support our city, cope with that shift, cope with that change, and come out of it as strong as possible? And we've recognised the degree of that impact. So the impact of lockdown for 3 months. There are people in our city who've been at home, self-isolating for the whole of that period. Self-isolation, the mental health impacts of that, the impact on physical health, people not going to hospital to get treatment they would have got normally because they haven't wanted to do that for a variety of reasons, and therefore deterioration in physical health, and changes in behaviour overall, and fundamentally the impact on our economy. We've all seen the announcements from Rolls-Royce. We recognise that a large proportion of our workforce are furloughed. What does it mean when we come out of furlough, when the government stops paying their wages? Are those businesses still viable? Are their models still actually make any sense in the new normal? So a real sense of what's the role of the council in helping, supporting, enabling, facilitating our city to come out of this, and recognising the tremendous impact of some of those things. So it's our role about marshalling those partners, working in collaboration. And across the board, in the last 3 months, we've worked in ways that have been really want to capture for the future. We've worked at pace. we've worked alongside partners. We haven't been in charge. We've shared power with people in terms of delivering the best outcome quickly for our people locally. We've reduced our bureaucracy, and there's some really important sort of principles about how we've worked we want to maintain going forward. So that sense of outcomes. What's the outcome we're trying to solve, and how do we get to that point quickly rather than taking a long time to find an answer? How do we work in a cultural way that's much more alongside people rather than trying to be in charge of things? Collaboration being an essential component, transforming, and that adaptive, being able to be quite flexible and move and do things differently to meet particular need. And those principles will stand us in really good stead for the next phase, because we don't know what the impact is going to be of COVID to the future of our city and our country. Some of these things are unknown. So how do we make sure we're able to respond in the best way? In terms of the recovery, it's a framework, this recovery, about how we want to approach it rather than the detail of it. Obviously, the detail will be coloured in by working with our partners on some of how those things might actually act in reality. But fundamentally, in terms of the priorities, the economic recovery has taken a faster pace, because it's really important about putting some things in place to really deal with some of those particular economic shocks to our system. And so we have recognised the impact of civil aerospace reduction. We know at a national, international level, the likelihood of coming back to pre-COVID levels of air travel is going to be very low. Within 3 to 5 years of recovery, that's going to have a major impact on us, because we are a city that is really dependent on large part on the civil aerospace industry in Rolls-Royce, but also in the supply chain. Additionally, we had challenges in our economy before COVID. Our city centre, some of our business models and our traditional business sort of sectors, and whether they were strong enough or in that current climate, they're going to be impacted even more so under COVID. So really, and there's a really interesting report written by Centre for Cities looking at the impact of all cities across the country and recognising we were worst affected in our economy because of those reliance on civil aviation and traditional manufacturing industry. So we are taking significant shocks around that. So we really need to focus on how we support that recovery in that area. So the strands we're talking about in the recovery are 3 strands: the economic recovery, our community, and I mean by that our health and well-being of our people, not just about the community, but how citizens are feeling and supported in the recovering after recovery, and then also what does it mean for the organisation itself? So our organisation, how does that need to change and be different post-COVID? So I mentioned that we want to make sure this is going to be our job over the next few years. This is what we're going to focus most of our time on, is how do we get ourselves from where we've been into a much better place as a city. So our delivery plan for the council will be framed in this way, around these 3 big strands and themes of a recovery. So the economic one, a city of big ambition. That's really very resonant there. How do we support business resilience and economic growth? We've done some really good work, absolutely, through our Renaissance board, working with a range of our partners across the business sector, the big businesses and also the smaller ones, the business improvement districts, the SMEs, working on a basis of creating a task force, supporting our business and our partners, and the chief exec very much front and centre of leading that work. And we're working as a partnership on a detailed recovery plan about some of the things we need to be doing quite upfront, whether that's about economic recovery funds, supporting our new refresh of our city centre master plan in a different way, really developing our skills and our employment sort of offers across our partnership. So some detail being fleshed out in that strand, and that is quite advanced, if you like, in this context. In the second big strand, for the community, the health and happiness, and that is much more about how are our people affected by COVID, recognising the wonderful work we did working with our partners in the voluntary community sector in creating that community hub response at a local level, working in partnership to support those most vulnerable, but actually building resilience in those communities. How do we maintain that going forward and not lose the wonderful work we've achieved around that? What's the systematic changes in our health and social care system? We've worked with health around discharge from hospital, supporting our care homes in completely different ways. We've cut through some of the old arguments, if you like, about who pays for what, and just got on and done things in that system as a system. How do we maintain that and build on that for the future and not go back to what we were doing before? How do we support those children who are out of education for a long time? How do we support those physical and mental health issues that are existing in our communities, and some of the more prosaic issues around those who are facing domestic violence. There's a whole load of stuff there, and if we're going to be able to address some of those things, we need to do it in partnership. And then also the third strand, a council focus on the things that matter. How do we embed some of that transformation, of that cultural change in how we organise ourselves as an organisation? I mean, if I would put money on, would we be working on Skype for all of our meetings and even our council meetings 4 months ago? Probably not, and yet we are. So how can we use that? It's not the answer to everything. It's still a need for, physical contact with human beings, but there is something about how we've worked digitally in a very different space. How do we capture that and that engagement?
I think 4 weeks ago I probably wouldn't have even had a bet on it after the last exec scrutiny meeting.
Wasn't going to mention that particular meeting, but absolutely we've learned, and we're learning really fast, aren't we, as a set of partners, a council, and that's a phenomenal thing. So how do we maintain that speed and that energy? So this work really is about scoping out the framework about how we want to approach our recovery. It isn't colouring in all the detail of that recovery, but the fundamental priority of all of that is working in partnership with our city. So we see a really important role for all of these strands, working with those stakeholders, the cultural and community sector, the business sector, working with the people that make our city work, fundamentally creating that collaborative approach to how we come out of this recovery. So it isn't the detail, it's a framework. What we're asking members to do at Cabinet is to approve the approach for developing that plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rachel, and absolutely, I was reading this earlier on. It looks like a very ambitious project, and we're not coming out of this with our eyes closed and our fingers in our ears. We're trying to be ambitious, and I really enjoyed that. So I'm just going to open it up. I can imagine there'll be some questions on this. So Councillor Shankar, do you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a few comments and a few questions, if that's okay. Firstly, I'll just mention it briefly here because this probably needs a different forum to recognise properly. But the work our officers across the council in all service areas, along with officers and partners from some other stakeholders across the city, along with the residents, has just absolutely been phenomenal in responding to the pandemic, and it's been truly humbling as an elected member to see people do that, people coming together and looking after each other. It's something we wouldn't have probably imagined would happen, and how it's happened and the speed of how everything's come together and people responding to each other's needs has just been truly incredible. Going back to this report then, particularly, I think Rachel's explained it, but for me the title of the report is somewhat misleading because if anything, this isn't a plan. This is just a strategy to get a plan. I think Rachel mentioned that this is just purely almost like a mission statement on what we want to try and do. And we've got to seize that opportunity, absolutely. I think working together collaboratively is absolutely key to be able to do that. And that's not just, politically for us, but it's partner organisations, voluntary organisations, the council, along with residents across the city. And the report does recognise that the council needs to absolutely lead that. And I think it's really, really important as the authority in the council and as elected members, the council plays a massive part in setting a really ambitious strategy as well. I think we've got to use this opportunity to get away from business as usual. Things seem to take forever to get agreed and progressed in the council, and we've proven over recent weeks that's not necessarily always necessary. We can always do things differently if we just work together and think outside of the box. So I think what I would like to see added to this strategy document, because I don't want to call it a plan because it's not a plan, is how the council will lead that and how the council will be really, really ambitious to try and get things moving, which have not moved for a number of years. They've been stalled for one reason or another. How we make sure the the right forum, and the leadership board may be doing that. The business forum, or working with the business forum collaboratively again with the council, how that does that. So I'll come back, Chair, if that's okay with you, with a recommendation. But I'd just like to probably hear from Rachel, or if Simon's on, is what's the strategic view of the council on how ambitious we could be to make sure we do things differently, but the council truly is playing that leadership role rather than sitting aside and seeing what the effect is and then we trying to deal with the effect. We really need to be on our front foot and dealing with this response.
Thank you, Councillor Shankar. Obviously, I will take your recommendation later on. I'll pass that question over to Rachel.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair. And we also have Heather Green's on the call, also has been part of developing some of this thinking, so I might ask her to add some detail if necessary. I think one of our mechanisms, and we are having the first meeting of that in 2 weeks' time, is our City Leadership Board, where we pull together for the first time all of the various thematic boards we have that are partnership boards in our city. So our Culture and Leisure Board, our Safer Board, our Stronger Board, our Renaissance Board, our Learners Board, bringing those chairs together to really get a sense of how all those pieces of the jigsaw work together to create a collaborative, approach across the city, so that some of the recovery work is driven by that leadership board, because that's a place where we can marshal some of those stakeholders into sort of a formation, if you like, to work collectively. And that's a really important piece of that jigsaw, I think, if we're going to be able to do that, because we can't do it on our own. I think that's pretty much a fundamental point. The council can't make the recovery happen for Mr. Darby without all of those stakeholders playing a part and working in the same direction. So I think the leadership board is quite an important component to that, I would suggest. Do you want to add anything, Heather?
No, I don't think so. I suppose what I wanted to just reiterate is that the framework that Rachel has described in the recovery plan, they very much align with what we have in the council plan. However, I think what we need to do is recognise that things have changed. We have seen, as Rachel said, a significant kind of just moving of sands over the last few months, and we need to reflect on that in our priorities, and that's what we'll be doing in conjunction with partners going forward. So, obviously we are looking to develop the plan over the next few weeks and months, and bring that back to Cabinet and Scrutiny in the summer for review. Thank you.
Just one other observation there. Yeah, see, and this is the thinking which I think we need to just sort of move on beyond. Taking that time and being a bit casual about when we bring this back, for me is just a little bit frustrating to hear, because what we can't do as a city is wait to see what the outcome is and then we start responding. I think we need to get the right people together and start doing stuff. And talking to Paul, I think some of that is happening, in fairness, but I think we need to be sort of a bit more preemptive and be working some of those plans up now, rather than just seeing what the effect of this is and then dealing with it, because my worry is if we do that, we could be too late.
Yeah, I could just to add to that. I mean, we are absolutely working on it now, and the steering group for the economic strand is meeting weekly, has met weekly for the last 4 weeks, about fleshing out the detail of that. So that is pretty much is in train. I think the community and the health and wellbeing side, there are pieces of work developing already about how we want to do certain things. I won't sort of share them here particularly, but they are happening, and that steering group needs to be set up to oversee those particular actions. But there is no sense of waiting for anything. I think we could wait for a long time to get absolute clarity on what changes are going to be. We need to be getting on with it now. But I want just to make the point that the resources of the officers to do everything, it doesn't stretch forever, and there are limits about capacity and time to do some of these bits and pieces. But absolutely, a leadership board will focus on some of that recovery stuff at its meeting in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to assume that's the end of your questions, Councillor Shankar.
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ashburner, is there any question from you? Okay, I'll come back to Councillor Ashburner. Councillor Testro, any question from you?
No, I'm happy with that, thank you.
Councillor Evans?
No questions, Chair.
And Councillor Kerr?
Yes, please. I really, really like the emphasis in here on looking at what we have learned during this COVID period, where the communities have come together and people have been helping each other, and both in a local scale, within the voluntary sector, and corporately across the city. It's been really, really positive, and I'm absolutely with Councillor Shanker that we need not to lose the momentum of that thinking, and we need to be doing something now. The thing that worries me a bit is that while we have that sort of community-wide thinking underpinning what we want to do, the community isn't seeing that. What we're seeing is that the high-level boards are doing stuff. They're having meetings, you said, weekly in some cases, and that is good, but it's not engaging with the people across the city in whose hands the real regeneration and moving forward of Derby lies, and they need to feel part of that and fully engage with it. I was in a meeting of the Active Travel Forum, must be 3 weeks ago now, and there was an anticipation that there was going to be money that we could bid for, which we put in a bid for last week, and they desperately wanted to be involved in putting forward the suggestions as to what sorts of schemes might be going forward. And there was a feeling of pushback that officers are too busy to listen, was the feeling. And as you've said, Rachel, officers are incredibly busy at the moment. And the solution, as I see it, is to make more use of the community, so that the community is doing the engagement and then feeding back to officers in a manner that is more digestible, so that officers aren't having to do everything but can be having things done. It really is a new way of doing things, and it's going to be as steep a learning curve as we've all gone through in doing the IT over the last 6 weeks. But that is not quite what this says, and I'm not quite sure if that's what it does need to say. So that's my first point, is really wanting to engage as way forward. The second point is something which this pandemic has flagged up to us all, and this report seems to be silent on, and that is the way that we have our health inequalities of COVID reflecting the health inequalities that we already had in our city. That depending on your colour, on your income, on your age, your quality of life is different, and we need to address that as well. This is an opportunity when we're thinking about health issues, and we need to be doing that. Whether the health and well-being section is already thinking along those lines, I don't know, because this report itself seems to be silent on it, but it's something that we need to be addressing. And the third thing is that there are clearly some things that we need to do immediately, and there are other things, as you said, Rachel, that we're going to need to be doing over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And I think those two pieces of work need to be very consciously going on in parallel. We can't ignore either side. And when we have a recommendation which simply says to approve the approach for developing the Derby recovery plan, I don't think it's got enough structure to it. So I want to put forward 3 recommendations which broadly cover what I've been talking about.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. We'll come to those recommendations afterwards.
Thank you.
No problem. Rachel, would you like to reflect on anything that Councillor Kerr has said?
No, I mean, I think I absolutely agree. I think the point about engaging, working alongside partners, there's cultural change there. It's about giving officers permission to share responsibility, share power. We've had some great examples of that. The community hub is a great one. We could never have done that without working with the food network and with the voluntary community sector. So it is about recognising that as one of the strands in the organisational change, how we give officers permission to do that more often. I think we haven't covered every detail of everything in the framework, but I think some of the fleshing of it out of it will incorporate some of those aspects that Councillor Kerr has mentioned.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm just going to see if Councillor Ashburner is ready to let us know whether he has a question.
No, I have no question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Councillor Ashburner. Councillor Peatfield, over to you if you have any.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I would like to commend the council on focusing not just on the finance but on the community. I think it's a fantastic thing that we're doing to look at what we've achieved in this this emergency and harness what we've done so far and grow on that. Having been involved in a food bank for the last 9 months, God, it feels like it, 9 weeks, you know, I've seen firsthand how community stepped up, how the volunteer section has stepped up, and how everybody is working so much better together for the greater good. So it's all fantastic, and we must not lose that. With that in mind, I do have a recommendation. It's a good one, so I'll type that up now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Rachel, any response or to reflect on anything that Councillor Peatfield has said?
No, I would agree with all of that, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And obviously, Councillor Peatfield, we'll take your recommendation at the end. Thanks. Councillor Hazelgrave, do you have a recommendation?
I have no recommendation, but I would like to echo the comments that have been made in terms of how the council has actually got on and done this, and seen that this is really important as something you have to grasp fairly quickly rather than kind of waiting for things to develop. So I'm really glad to see that that's important. Clearly in time we will need to be looking at issues to redress the educational issues that have come out of you know, so little time being spent in school by some children, etc. But that's obviously not part of this plan, but it will need to be given some thought, and hopefully it'll be tackled at national level.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelgrave. I did mean any question or comment, so well pointed out with the recommendation side. I appreciate that. Sorry. Councillor Hudson.
No, thank you, Chair. Everybody's already touched upon what I was going to say. Thank you.
No problem. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to echo similar sentiments to what Councillor Shanker said earlier. It's been a humbling period and a challenging period working in the communities across Derby. It's really been a challenge for many of us, but there's been a lot of good work being done, a lot of hard work being done. Just want to ask a couple of questions to Rachel, really. In point 4.2, it mentions volunteers and other organisations working with the council. You know, would it be appropriate to bring up, you know, is there any mechanism to recognise each and every volunteer an organisation in an official universal capacity to thank them for all the hard work and the endeavour that they've done for the community and the city? And secondly, point 4.3, it talks about COVID-19 continues to fall. Has there been any consideration if there may be a second wave or any other spikes post that, what effects that would have on the plan, and what kind of effects that would have on the city? Thank you.
Okay, some good questions in there. In terms of thanking volunteers, I mean, it's interesting. Last week we had a donation from a local flower distributor, flower supplier, whatever they're, a whole range of bouquets, and we went around and we gave those bouquets to a number of volunteers. We asked each of the sort of ward coordinators who's the volunteer's done the most or done really great stuff and who deserves one. And we went around and gave those to them, which was really well received by people, and that was really nice to meet people. Absolutely, we were really keen to do messaging. We could do more messaging to really thank those people, because they are just the people who live here, who care about their neighbours and their friends and their family and want to participate. It was really amazing to see how much they wanted to do that, and we created the environment to enable them to do that, and we could never do it without them. So absolutely, more we can do to thank people for all of that, absolutely maintain that, no question about it. In terms of the COVID position, I mean, clearly none of us know the answer to that question. At the moment, the R rate in the Midlands is at 0.9. We know there's a tolerance to that R rate of 0.2. So obviously we haven't got data that drills beneath that into the local areas. So we don't really know what's going on in local areas, and the impact of the lifting of lockdown is not known at this stage yet, but we are hopeful that it isn't increasing a second spike. Now clearly anything one of the things about this plan, or this approach to the plan, is about being adaptive and being flexible. We're going to need to respond, as we have in the crisis actually, quickly about things that change. If, heaven forbid, we got a second spike, a second peak of deaths and infections, and had to react to that, it would change this plan fundamentally, because we have to focus again on that emergency, wouldn't we? So it needs to be adaptive to be able to respond to things that happen we can't predict.
Sorry, apologies for that. I thought I'd pressed the button. Yeah, thank you for that, Rachel. Are you hearing me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, good. Thank you for that. And Councillor Cooper, just checking that your everything there was to your liking, or if you've got any follow-ups.
Yeah, in fact, I had a COVID-19 Chaddersden team discussion this morning with involved in that, and it was mentioned about a number of volunteers getting those mentions. But we discussed it, and we felt as a group that instead of choosing a number of people, I think it's got to be recognised that all those people that themselves forward in a universal way really do need to be recognised. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. So I'll move on to the section now relating to recommendations. So let me just, so I'll go through the list. Just speak up if you have one. Councillor Shankar.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Shankar. Is it in the comments section?
It's in the comment section, and I can read it out if you like. Or
that would be brilliant. No, yeah, that'd be really helpful. Oh, it's in Times New Roman.
Look at that, see? The Council needs to be ambitious in its leadership of the city's recovery from the pandemic and must increase its own focus on key strategic projects such as the new performance venue and the Guildhall, but also city centre living projects, bringing forward decisions without further delay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shankar. So we'll take that to the vote then, shall we? Let's go down the list. So, Councillor Shankar, your vote, please.
I'll vote for it, Chair.
That's a shock. Councillor Ashburner, your vote.
Four. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Good.
That's 8. 2 4s are 8. Sorry, Councillor Testro. Councillor Testro.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Well, these things are important. I'm not sure that the council has the capacity to do this as well as the post-COVID things, so I'm sorry, I'm going to vote against.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Peatfield.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Heselgrave.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
I don't know if a concert venue will be in demand anytime soon, so I'll abstain.
Okay, Councillor Cooper.
Abstain.
Okay, and I am going to vote against that one because I share the concerns about capacity. That passes though. Is that right, Stephen? I wasn't keeping count.
I've just tallied up. Now I have 4 for.
Yeah.
2 against.
Yeah.
And 4 abstain.
Okay, no problem. That's fine. So that passes. So that's a recommendation of this committee.
We have equal. I think it'd be your casting vote now, Chair. We have 4 for and 4 abstains.
No, it's passed, surely.
Oh, sorry, yes,
apologise.
yes.
Abstains, not against, remember.
Sorry,
yeah.
Apologies.
No problem. I understand where you...
Out of practice, Stephen.
Okay, yeah, so that passes and is a recommendation of this committee. So was there another one, Councillor Shankar?
Not from me, Chair.
Oh, that's a shame, isn't it?
Make one up.
No, it's okay. Councillor Ashburner, do you have a recommendation? Just unmute your mic for us, Councillor Ashburn.
Thank you. None from me.
Thank you very much. That's fine. Thank you. Councillor Testro, anything from you?
No, Chair. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. Councillor Evans, anything from you?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr, here we go. Presentation time.
I have three.
Three, right, let's go.
Should we take them one at a time?
I think that's very sensible, yeah.
So the first one is to enable opportunities for all people from across all communities and sectors to be heard in the development of the way forward, starting from now. And I've particularly put the phrase at the beginning, to enable, because that doesn't mean the council has to do it itself. It means it can be working with community organisations to achieve that.
That's fine, Councillor Kerr. I'm going to take that to the vote. Councillor Shankar.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify what the first bit was? That was it all people?
To enable opportunities for people from across all communities and sectors to be heard in the development of the way forward.
4.
Councillor Shankar is 4. Councillor Ashburner.
4.
4. Thank you, Councillor Ashburner. Councillor Testrow.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Evans.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Peatfield.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Heselgrave. Sorry.
4.
Thank you. I dropped the H then. Councillor Udson.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper.
4.
Thank you, and Councillor Anderson is 4. That is the recommendation of exec scrutiny. Let's move on to the second recommendation, which is to embed health thinking clearly within the strategy so that we end up with a city with fewer health inequalities.
You have to say is as to embed health thinking. It doesn't work very well on the layout here, but it's health thinking.
Okay, apologies.
Not health and thinking.
Apologies for my pronunciation, Councillor Kerr. I will try and work harder in the future. Okay, let's take that one to the vote. Councillor Shankar.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Ashburner.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Testrow.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Peatfield.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Heselgrave.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Udson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson. 4. There we go then. That is a recommendation of exec scrutiny. Executive scrutiny, sorry, we're a public, aren't we? Okay, number 3, third recommendation is to be working in parallel on both immediate and longer term strands of this work. Did I read that okay, Councillor Kerr? Is that?
That was perfect.
Thank you, I appreciate that. You would have been a fantastic teacher. Councillor Shankar.
4, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ashburner.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Testrow.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Peatfield.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Heselgrave.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Udson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
4.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Anderson is 4. That is, again, a recommendation of executive scrutiny. Councillor Kerr, is that it?
Chair, sorry, I've just got booted out there for a second.
Oh.
Read that third one. I could see that was passed, but I'm presuming the third recommendation relates to the previous 2. It has reference to the previous 2. We're working in parallel on both immediate and longer term strands of this work.
In terms of this work, it's the whole of the
strategy.
The whole of the strategy and the plan that is talked about in the report, in the document that Rachel introduced.
So that was also my interpretation.
It's not specific to 1 and 2. It's specific to the whole of the plan and the report.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Thank you.
So
I booted out at the wrong time.
If you want to
no, that's fine.
Change this work and define
of the work of this strategy, something like that.
This plan, the development of this plan.
It sort of goes through as is, but we all understood what we were voting for.
Yes,
and I'm sure tomorrow we will be able to have that discussion at Cabinet. So don't panic too much about semantics, Councillor Kerr, on that one. And you had a go at me for reading it wrong, eh? Right, we move on to Councillor Peatfield. Do you have any recommendations?
I do, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So regarding community recovery, we should not only look to the usual suspects to collaborate with, but also invite the volunteers who have contributed during the COVID emergency to be involved from the beginning.
Thank you, Councillor Peatfield. I'm happy to take that straight to the vote then. Councillor Shankar?
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ashburner?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Testro?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Evans?
For.
Councillor Kerr?
For.
Councillor Peatfield?
For.
Councillor Hazelgrave?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper?
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Anderson is for. That becomes a recommendation of Executive Scrutiny Committee. Were there any more from you there, Councillor Peatfield?
No, thank you, Chair.
Now's the time, because everyone's agreeing. So, like, now's the time to sneak something in, guys. Okay, I'm going to move on. Councillor Hazelgrave, do you have any recommendations?
No, Chair.
No, thank you very much. Councillor Hudson, do you have any recommendations?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, anything from you?
No, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that is the end of that that particular item. Just also want to echo everything that's been said by colleagues so far. You know, all the staff at the council are working so hard. You know, they are the key workers, and they are helping to keep our city running. And I really do hope that we remember that in the future, because obviously things are going to be difficult, and we need to make sure that we remember the people who had our back as we move forward. Does anyone want to buy a 19-month-old? Okay, right. Thank you. Okay, yeah, moving on to the next item, which is item 10, compliance with contracts and financial procedure rules. And this one is the property of... this one is the...
Yeah, of me, Chair.
Someone help me out, yeah. There we go, Brill. You can have it.
So this is the standard report on the compliance with contract and financial procedure rules. There are 4 items detailed in this report. The first one is to approve rights of free irrecoverable debts, and they relate to Connect Darby rent that was due in the period of 2015 to 2017, where either through insolvency or after recovery action we are unable to recover, and they total just under £46,000. The second item is in respect of capacity money for the South Derby Growth Zone. Members will be aware that we were sort of saddened by not getting the HIF money, but the South Derby Growth Zone remains very important to our city in terms of developing that both for housing, infrastructure and the economy, and that is trying to get some money to help us going forward. Members will also recall that in, I think it was late February, early March, we learned that we've been successful in securing Transforming Cities Fund. So this paragraph 4.3 talks about the governance arrangements around it, but just to re-emphasise, it's nearly 62 million of funding, including some specific Derby schemes, as well as, if you want to call it, wider connectivity with Nottingham and East Midlands airports. And again, that is really good news for not just ourselves as the city, but also the region's prosperity. And the final part of the report is really just bringing you up to speed and up to date with previous decisions we had made around the local air quality plan, and the fact that now we're at the stage of a full business case, which has been submitted and funding secured. So to, if you want to call it, close the circle, to complete this, we have included it in here for you to sort of consider. So overall, 4 fairly standard reports, but I'm happy, or there's other people on the call who are happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Simon. Greatly appreciated. I'm going to now open up to questions from members. Councillor Shankar, do you have any questions?
Just a couple of quick ones, Chair. Evening, Simon. On the first one, the Connect Derby bad debts. I mean, Connect Derby's been a huge success. It's a fantastic project, and £46,000 is a very modest amount in what that brings to the city and does for the city. But just some reassurance really on how thorough have we been in trying to get that money now or previously. And that question is sort of based on previous debt write-offs that we've sort of brought all the way to this stage, and then at a very late stage, you know, those people who the council were telling us they couldn't get hold of, and you know, members had phone numbers of them people to be able to direct officers towards them, and I don't know how successful we were in chasing those debts. So just some reassurance on the due diligence done on this, like I say, modest amount. And then second questions around the Transforming Cities Fund. Excellent amount of money, £62 million allocated to Darby. That's fantastic. It's a drop in the ocean, unfortunately, of the cuts we've seen since 2010, which has decimated local authorities. So having some of that money put back into local authorities is welcome, and it is good news. But what sort of consultation was done to identify? You know, we've spoke about consultation involving people early on in the recovery strategy, but when these projects were identified for the bid, what level of consultation was done with residents, key city stakeholders, businesses, etc.?
So thank you, Councillor Shankar. Verna is on the call, so she'll take the second question. But in respect of the first, the good thing about Connect Derby is that we have a very direct relationship with the service we're providing. So that will not stop people going into insolvency, which is one of the debts. And also, as I think you indicated, a bad debt of less than 46,000 in respect of now debt that was 2 to 3 years old. We go through all recovery action, including sort of all the routes, including recovery agents that we use on behalf of the council. And as with business rates, you will get a number of businesses who, due to their circumstances or sort of in some cases not being able to trace the business post them going out of the centre, but we have struggled to find it. This is a public part of the agenda, obviously, so I can't name the businesses, and some of these businesses will also be sole traders as well, which we wouldn't name anyway. But I'm confident that we've had the appropriate recovery action, and any recovery action has to be proportionate to the amount of outstanding debt. So I'm comfortable that these write-offs are properly evidenced and correct. I'll now hand over to Verna in respect to the Transforming Cities, as this project has been obviously in development, and our success has been a long time coming.
Hello, thank you, Simon, and hello, Scrutiny. Pleased to take that question. Certainly, this Transforming Cities programme was developed over about 18 months or so in conjunction with Nottingham City Council, and a number of consultations took place over the time. Myself and Nigel both attended Regen and Housing Scrutiny on a number of occasions. We also went to the Green Forum. We've conducted an Equalities Impact Assessment with Nottingham, and a number of other key stakeholders and groups around the city. And we also, as part of the programme, did a public consultation. So we had a public survey, which ourselves and Nottingham both took part. So it was on both our websites, and had feedback from the public on the schemes and the outline of Transforming Cities as well. So it's never enough, and I accept that, as well as the comments you've said tonight. But we did try our best to consult with as many people as possible along the way.
Thank you very much. Just going to check, are there any follow-up questions on that one?
No, there isn't, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bernard. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Councillor Shankar. Councillor Fina, no, Emily's not a councillor. Councillor Ashburner, sorry, it's been a long day.
Oh, that made me giggle.
Nothing major, just really, I think you mentioned Bernier mentioned an equalities assessment. Have we seen that?
You might not have seen it. It's obviously this isn't the first time that this has been through the cabinet process, or this is specifically around the financial matters. So certainly be something that I think but we can share that with you. That's not a problem.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I mean, is it new or is it old?
It's old, so it was done a while ago.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
No, right.
I don't need to send it to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ashburn, and thank you, Werner, for the explanation there as well. Councillor Testro, do you have anything to add or ask?
No, all straightforward, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Just really to carry on from where Councillor Shanker spoke regarding the Connect, and it's related to the debts of the rent, really. And on two of them, it does say unable to recover. I take that to understand, from my perspective, that those businesses are still trading, are not insolvent. And so I'd like to say, as the possibility being explored for a long-term management of that debt at a payback of a much smaller level over a longer period, or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. We are looking at alternative ways, and I think you might be talking about factoring debt and other such items, and other techniques where we are finding it, our recovery agents are finding it difficult to trace debtors, and whether there are other options. At the moment, that is probably more relevant to more recent debt, because it is when debt is now dating back to 2015, it's obviously more difficult to trace that. But we are definitely picking up your view that we need to use every tool in the toolbox, not just be typical enforcement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I'm going to... Councillor Carey, are you still here?
I'm still here.
Oh, thank goodness for that. Okay, do you have any questions?
I have questions on two of them. On the lovely £62 million, and we're now moving into a post-COVID way of thinking. So some of the schemes that we came up with, for example, with an emphasis on public transport, may need to be reviewed, and I think that the government would agree that they may need to be reviewed, and I don't know what the process is for doing that. And if there isn't a process already, then I think we need to do that and to make sure that stakeholders and other people can feed into that. So there's a question in that area. And then the second one was regarding the air quality, which is presumably the Stafford Street scheme. And my understanding is that that was fairly marginal and on the edge of needing to be acted, and only likely to be a problem for a short period of time, maybe a couple of years. Now, given that we are all now working from home, and maybe the traffic levels are going to remain lower than they were, has a review been done to ensure that that work is actually still needed to go ahead? And if not, is it going to be done before we actually put sort of spade in the ground?
Hi, do you want me to come back on those two to give you a response? On the TCF and the 62 million, I agree, we do live in a post-COVID world, and we are already looking at the schemes from that perspective. But at the end of the day, the funding has been granted to us by the Department for Transport on the schemes that we put forward. So anything we wish to change, and this delegation that's in this report allows us to, in consultation, as stated, review and vary the programme. But anything that we do would have to be in consultation with the Department for Transport, and they would need to be comfortable and happy with what we proposed. So yes, we can do that, and we are doing that. How much that will change, because I think some of those things, a lot of the schemes, as you've seen, are for cycling and walking anyway. So I think there's quite a good package of measures that are appropriate for post-COVID. But yes, we can have that conversation. And on the air quality, we have a ministerial directive and we must fulfil it, and government still require us to fulfil it. DEFRA still want us to go ahead with the programme. We are still monitoring the air quality, and you'd be surprised that some of the changes are not as dramatic as you might have assumed. So we still believe there is a need for the scheme. The NO2 levels are still higher than we would want. And again, we're in consultation with DEFRA, with JACU, and we review the position as we go along. But as it stands at the moment, we still have a ministerial direction that we need to fulfil, unfortunately.
Thank you. Just checking, Councillor Kerr, is there anything you want to come back with on that?
I'm disappointed about the DEFRA one, but if we haven't, are we regularly providing DEFRA with information on the air quality issues and what the current readings are? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Regarding the first point and the 62 million, I think this is a large amount of money, and I'm a little uncomfortable with just going with effectively delegation of that to cabinet member and officers on schemes that are going to be going out across a lot of the city and affecting a lot of people over several years. So I think we should look at that again, and I'd appreciate other people's views on how we might look at that, whether it should just be a let's consult people at a low level, or whether we should be expecting a higher level of oversight of that and sending it to ourselves or to a different scrutiny. Thank you.
I mean, thank you, Councillor Kerr. I mean, I'll just come in and maybe Emily would like to probably add to this, but I don't think anything in terms of the consultation on it. I don't think it's anything different to what would normally occur. Although if someone wants to, tell me otherwise, then I'll hear that. Emily, help.
No, I don't have anything further to add on that, Ed, unless Werner or Heather, who is maybe slightly closer to consultation processes, have anything additional.
No, I mean we will of course will be going to Regen and Housing Scrutiny to update on the programme as we have so far. So I would see that as an intrinsic part of our scrutiny on the programme. If that is sufficient. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. The only reason I just mentioned Emily was I don't know if there was any statutory need to anything more, but that's fine. Thank you, Werner. Councillor Kerr, anything further to add?
I was going to see if I could look up on what our total highways and transport work programme cost is usually in the year, for which we get quite a lot of consultation because it includes our individual priorities for our wards and other schemes that have gone through various processes, whereas this is a big sum of money, and I'm just thinking that I like to feel that there is significant oversight there, not just with us as a council, but also the people who are going to benefit from that spending, people across the city.
Okay, I mean, I guess maybe when we go around and talk about recommendations, I could possibly invite you, as always, to if you wanted to submit one, do. So am I okay to carry on and move on to Councillor Peatfield, Councillor Kerr? Thank you. Thumbs up. Councillor Peatfield.
Nothing from me, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I've realised I've turned into like a waltzers DJ. Councillor Hazelgrave.
Nothing from me either.
Thank you. Cheers. Councillor Hudson.
No, thank you, Chair.
Excellent, thank you. And Councillor Cooper. I think we've lost Councillor Cooper.
Councillor Cooper left the meeting about 20 minutes ago, Chair. He put something in the notes, but he's had to go, unfortunately, so he's no longer participating.
My bad. Okay, no problem. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any recommendations? We'll start with Councillor Shanker.
No, Chair.
No, okay, thank you. Councillor, I nearly did Councillor Feenan again. Councillor Ashburner. Councillor Ashburner. Okay.
No comment, sorry.
No comment. Okay. you don't have to say anything unless you wish to do so. Councillor Testro.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Evans.
No, Chair, thank you.
Councillor Kerr, go on then, what you got for us?
Sorry, I haven't been able to find the figure from the Highways and Transport Work Programme while I've been
okay, I'll come back to you.
Through. But I've got a recommendation regarding the Transforming Cities Fund.
Okay, yep.
To ask Cabinet to ensure appropriate reviews take place on the plans post-COVID and that councillors, stakeholders and the wider public have opportunities to input into the more detailed schemes before approval, as in 2.9. So 2.9 is where the recommendations are for Director and Cabinet Member. So I'm trying not to be prescriptive, but to say there needs to be something there.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I'm going to just take that to the vote now. Councillor Shankar.
4.
Councillor Ashburner.
4.
Councillor Testro.
4.
Councillor Evans.
4.
Councillor Kerr.
4.
Councillor Peatfield.
4.
Councillor Hazelgrave.
4.
Councillor Hudson.
4.
Councillor Cooper's not there. I abstain on that one. So that passes. Was there another recommendation than Councillor Kerr?
No, just that one. I was reassured on the air quality that we really need to have to go ahead with that one, although I don't want it to be the case.
Thank you, but thank you for your pragmatism all the same, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Peatfield, do you have a recommendation?
Nothing here, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelgrave.
Me neither, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to Simon for presenting that, and we appreciate it. I'm going to move on now to item number 11, which is Council response to COVID-19 pandemic, and this is the final item this evening. Ding, ding, ding. So the presenter of this is, well, whoever. I'll let you guys decide.
It's me again, Simon, Chair, and you're a very good DJ, by the way.
Thank you.
So I don't intend repeating everything that was mentioned by members in the Darby recovery plan, and especially the acknowledgement of the efforts and real focus of all staff, partners, communities and business in respect of that, in respect of COVID. It was unprecedented time, but I think what is really sort of rooted here is that we did it in the spirit of the values that we have and the ambitions and priorities of the city. So if I just pick out maybe 4 items in here which are transformational, where we didn't just respond, but we actually created probably different outcomes that we wouldn't have necessarily expected. So very early on, the council took the decision to rent a hotel on Pride Park in order to house rough sleepers. And the report talks about between 40 and 50 people receiving service there. But I think it's also important that all the partners have provided that wraparound care, which has meant that people who obviously were rough sleeping with dysfunctional ability to manage their affairs, to get service, have suddenly had that wraparound care. And the government now is picking up the agenda of, if you want to call it, trying to stop ruthless people going back on the streets, and this multi-agency approach. And we've demonstrated in Darby in this time that we have been able to achieve that. Another area where we were very quick off the mark was working with the CCG in respect of discharges from hospitals, in respect of a discharge lounge, in respect of arranging additional capacity for those discharge step-down arrangements. And they have been really amazing in terms of working with our colleagues in health in terms of the most appropriate discharge route for people, but also protecting them in respect of that journey back into the community. And our colleagues in the council have really been held up as exemplars of really good arrangements there. We're working on infection control with care homes. We're leading across the region in respect to some of the training, and we've also managed to work with the care sector in terms of its sustainability. So again, we weren't just reacting, but we were agile, but actually looking at what are the longer term benefits in our COVID response. Another area which I think we need to just reflect is the tremendous work by operational services. Yes, it has to be said that in the first couple of weeks of COVID, with anxiety, with people going into lockdown, with isolation, we did have some struggles with our operational services, such as refuse, but you can see in the report that we brought in capacity. We made arrangements to restart the brown bin service, to reopen Rainsway. And again, Rainsway is opened in a manner that I think the community has really recognised as meeting their need, as well as providing a safe environment. And indeed, lots of councils are approaching us to say, how did you avoid the 4-hour queues? How have you managed to sort of provide that open, honest and well communicated service to our residents? So I think we need to big up Street Pride, who have done some amazing work in this period. And the fourth area I think I just want to highlight is, and I know members have been appreciative, is that we have given over £81 million of support to businesses. If you had to lock down your business and you were getting no turnover, then having grants of 10 or 25,000 or rate relief has been fundamental to hopefully allowing them to continue. And as of today, we've paid out over 40 million of business rate grants to nearly 3,300 businesses. And again, from the feedback what we've got is that many people have appreciated that support. But as I think Rachel and all members have said, is that COVID hasn't stopped now, and we're trying to put arrangements in to, in a sense, support those who are most in need going forward. That might be people suffering personal hardship, it might be the skills agenda and the economic recovery plan, and everything else. So we've got a major agenda going forward, and it is still costing the council significant money to do the right thing. Having said that, up to the end of May, we'd got 14.9 million of funding, and we had additional costs of 5.1 million and loss of income of 3.8 million. So the government funding has covered the cost to date. If you were to ask, will it cover all the costs at the current level? No, and we are lobbying for additional government funding. But I think when I look relative to other authorities, I think we have managed some of the runaway trains that other people have seen in terms of social care. We have been responsive and agile in respect of operational services, and we have managed, I think, to deliver a very proactive service, not reactive, to the residents of Derby. And in this difficult time, not only the council has been alongside them, but also the community, and that has actually allowed us to deliver a very effective and, may I say, cost-effective response to the pandemic that we experienced. So the report was really to say, well done to the council, and the recommendations were fundamentally to note our response, but also to sort of acknowledge the work of everyone, not just the council, in working together for the benefit of the city during this period. So happy to take any questions along with my colleagues on this call, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. And just, to say, I mean, certainly on the tip that you mentioned, I know it's got a more technical name than that, but I don't care, I'm from Derby. It really was a phenomenal exercise in getting that open, and the level of service that was offered there. I mean, I unfortunately live 50 yards over the border in South Derbyshire, so I had to go to Renewal, and I can tell you, like, they need to come and do some work in finding out how to run a tip as well as our people did. So well done on that. Councillor Shankar, do you have any comments or questions? You know where I live, don't you? You walk past most days.
I do, just outside of Darby, like you say.
Yep.
Unfortunately. Yeah, no. Again, I won't reiterate what I said on the previous report. Fantastic efforts in lots and lots of areas, and you know, we need to come back to that and acknowledge that somehow. Just on the reopening the Rainsways, I mean, really, like you say, really positive feedback on the way that's been done. But do we know what the sort of numbers going through Rainsway now, you know, post COVID or during COVID, have been compared to what they would have been on a normal sort of weekend this time last year?
I don't, Councillor Shanker, but I can get that information for you.
No problems. That's all from me. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Councillor Shanker. Councillor Ashburner.
Just has any measure been taken of the amount of officer time which has been spent dealing with the COVID?
Simon?
Yeah, I think we have to recognise that for many people in the council, especially in the first, say, 6 to 8 weeks, they were providing probably 7-day cover, and especially the adult social care teams and the home care or home first teams really went beyond what would be reasonably expected in terms of the time. As I think Rachel North said earlier, it has been the focus of a huge amount of officer time, but I think we also have to recognise that we have achieved a lot of business as usual at that time. So, for example, in my area, we produced a set of accounts that the auditor could have. We haven't issued them yet, by the end of May as planned. And that's at the same time as trying to monitor all of these huge areas of expenditure that we have been able to monitor and manage. So I think the officers are tired, but actually we can't claim that, Councillor Ashburner.
I wasn't trying to criticise, I was merely trying to work out whether we had any idea how much time had been spent on it.
I think, to be honest, Councillor Ashburn, people would say that most people have spent 25 to 50% of their time responding, but obviously we've got 4,000 employees, and different people will have responded in different ways.
Well, right, yeah. Okay, I'm not particularly bothered. Thanks for the comment.
Thank you, Councillor Ashburner, and thank you, Simon, for the response. Let's move on to Councillor Testro.
Nothing from me, Chair, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Testro. Councillor Evans.
No recommendations, Chair, but I'd just like to make a comment. In the recommendations, 2.2, it really eloquently sums up how I think all of us feel, really, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Evans, and that will be on the public record, so thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I've really appreciated the support that individual officers have given when I've had particularly a COVID-related issue. It's been particularly challenging, I know, for some of the finance people, and the concern that individual business people have had over their life, you know, their whole life falling apart because of COVID. The support that's been given on things like that is just as important as the people who have needed to get access to food or to medicines, or need that phone call. There's a whole range of services, and you know, well done to everybody who's been part of that solution. The other side of this is finding out what we could have done better, and if COVID continues, or if we have another spike or whatever, what sorts of things we could be doing better. So, and also there are clearly learning things, such as Chair, you were saying about how to operate waste to bring sites, that we could be sharing with others as well. So I've got a recommendation along those lines, because I don't think that seems to have been covered in the report. I've also got one to echo Councillor Evans' point in terms of the sentiments in 2.2.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Simon. Carry on.
Maybe just before Councillor Kerr does her recommendation, in the report it talks about how this has been managed in terms of the governance and there being a tactical control group, which is about making decisions, but also the lessons learned about how we responded. Did we respond quick enough? Can we work better with partners if there was to be a second wave? So there is that constant reflection of how we have dealt with this pandemic. But having said that, I do think when I look at the decisions made and the fact that we made them, if we look at, say, rough sleeping, the outcome that we've achieved for the rough sleepers in the city by taking a brave decision to rent a whole hotel and wrap round care, I think is a good indication of how that's going to shape our future arrangements for how we support those ruthless people in our city. So there is that reflection, and I'm confident that the officer cohort is constantly reviewing how we can meet those needs in the future, whether or not there's a second wave of a pandemic.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Simon. And also just to remind you, to remind members, obviously there is a recommendation there is a mechanism where you can strongly endorse a recommendation should you not wish to actually add the recommendation. So Councillor Evans and Councillor Kerr so far have expressed complete agreement with 2.2. So if they wanted to, instead of actually writing, there we go. There is a mechanism to do that. So Councillor Kerr has put it in the notes. So we'll talk about that during recommendations. Okay. I'm going to move on now to Councillor Peatfield.
I just wanted to add my thanks to everybody and say how proud I am to be a part of Derby City Council at this time and to see its reaction. A special thanks from me go really to all of the officers who have been redeployed in completely different roles that they weren't expecting to, but have really stepped up to the mark. So just my thanks go out to all of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peatfield. Councillor Hazelgrave.
Well, I mean, we were hit hard by something, and it just goes to show that that expression Derby pride is something that really is there in the city, and it's just come more to the forefront, I think, through this. And let's hope that people, while they were looking inward to their families and protecting them, they were also looking outward to others, their immediate neighbours, people across the road, people they knew were vulnerable. And they rose to that challenge, and we became a more resilient, cohesive and caring city, I think. And I just hope that that's a legacy that we can all continue to be proud of.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelgrave, and I think there are some lovely sentiments there, and I'd agree. Councillor Hudson, anything to question or ask?
Hello, thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Shankar, I'm intrigued about the fluctuations of service demand across the board, like last year, the year before, and where we are now, and Rainsbury Tip would be a good example. Can I see that data as well, please, Simon?
Yes, and but maybe in other areas we've had reduced demand. So because it's like the A&E example, isn't it, that loads of people used to turn up at accident and emergency, and now 50% of the activity only turns up. So we are seeing both positives and negatives, Councillor Hudson.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just intrigued to see that data across the board, or get some kind of picture of what's actually happened.
Yeah,
thank you.
I can get that. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you, Councillor Hudson. Okay, so we're going to move on to the recommendations section, and I'll just go through the names. So Councillor Shankar.
No, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Testro. Oh, sorry, Councillor Ashburner.
No suggestions, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Testro.
Oh, 4.
4?
Oh,
Did you
sorry.
vote? Just loves democracy so much.
I got distracted there. No, there's nothing for me. Sorry.
Sorry, it's me distracting him.
Okay, good. Councillor Evans.
Nothing other than the strong endorsement of 2.2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kerr, then let's get your stuff sorted. So, recommendation 1 is for Cabinet to note executive scrutiny's strong endorsement of recommendation 2.2. Councillor Shankar.
Shall I just mention that 2.2 is...
We know which one it is. Right, just so we all know.
It's the one after 2.1.
Yeah, it's the one after 2.1 and the one that was nice.
It's the one that says to thank all the council staff and everyone involved across all sectors. That you're wonderful.
Oh, well, that's changed my mind. I might not vote for it now. No, I'm joking. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so Shankar, are you for, did you say? Sorry, Councillor Shankar, are you for?
Yes, mate.
Cheers, bud. Councillor Ashburner.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Testro.
4. I got it right this time.
Well done. You're smashing this now. Councillor Evans.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pete Field.
I'm 4.
I'm 4. Councillor Hazelgrave.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Anderson is also 4. Now let's move on to the second recommendation, and that is for Cabinet to recognise that we are not yet at the end of this COVID-19 pandemic, and to share our success with and to learn from other councils to enable the council to do the best for our citizens in the coming weeks and months. Geez, that's crying out for a full stop, Councillor Kerr. That is fine though. I think we all get the point, and as long as Stephen is able to use that. I'm just going to check something. Bear with me. Okay, good. Okay, so let's take that to vote as well. Councillor Shankar. Oh, Councillor Shankar. You're up against T here, hurry up. Councillor Ashburner.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Testro.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Peatfield.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelgrave.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
4.
And Councillor Anderson is also 4. Okay, that's it for Councillor Kerr's recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Let's move down to Councillor Peatfield. Any recommendations?
Nope.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelgrave.
None.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson. 4. No. Any recommendations?
No, thank you.
Could you two please concentrate? Thank you. Right.
Really, there's this really bizarre thing. If one of us has both of us got our mics on, we can hear ourselves through them.
Oh, that must be.
Yeah.
Now you know how we feel.
Must be hollow.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so that's item 11 done. I think that's the end of the meeting. Just want to say thank you to all officers for your time this evening, and it has been lovely to have all of you officers and councillors on my kitchen table this evening. It's always a pleasure. I also just want to say, this could potentially be maybe the last time I chair this meeting, so it has genuinely been a pleasure for this last municipal year to work with all of you on that. You've been a fantastic committee, and I feel like we've had good humour, and even when things have got a bit feisty, we've always managed to bring it back and unite over the fact that my chairing skills need some work. So thank you, everyone, and I hope your families are all safe and well.
Everybody, please take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheerio, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you very much.